Okay, let's dive right in. We're really jumping into the thick of it today. Just have a listen to this first.
Audio of boos and unintelligible speech, followed by slightly less loud applause. So that's the sound from President Lula's recent appearance at the Marcha dos Prefeitos in Brasília. It's this big meeting with mayors from all across Brazil.
Quite a welcome.
Yeah, quite the reception, wouldn't you say? And apparently this happened twice during the event.
Twice.
Wow. So we've got this really interesting source, a Portuguese language podcast segment. It features the host, Ricardo Dias, a news anchor, and also a commentator, Josias de Souza.
Okay, so different perspectives in one place.
Exactly. And that audio is kind of our starting point to understand what actually went down and, why it's significant. So our mission today is basically to get past the headlines, cut through some of that noise, and really get a feel for the political currents this whole thing stirred up.
And what's really interesting, I think, is that this isn't entirely new.
Well, the news anchor in that segment points out Lula faced booing at the same event last year, too.
Right, I remember reading that.
Yeah. And we're talking about a large group, 14,000 registered attendees, mayors, vice mayors, councilors. It's a pretty significant slice of local politics.
14,000, wow, that's huge.
It is. So the fact that this happened again, it suggests it's probably more than just, a couple of random hecklers in the crowd.
Absolutely. And the news report we looked at really highlighted that the first wave of boos, that was when Lula's name was announced, it was noticeably louder than any applause that came after.
Louder than the applause.
Yeah. You could even hear bits of Lula trying to get started, trying to speak over it, like this. Audio snippets of Lula attempting to speak over the boos. Eu quero and dar começar cumprimentando.
You can really sense the atmosphere there, just from those short clips.
Definitely. You can almost feel that tension, can't you? Now, Ricardo Dias, the host of this Portuguese podcast we mentioned, he had let's say a pretty unique take on it. Very satirical.
Yeah, and that's really important context for listeners, I think. Dias is known for that style-sharp humor, often quite exaggerated.
Right.
So his commentary is one specific way of looking at it. It's definitely got a viewpoint, It's not aiming for neutral analysis. We need to keep that satirical intent in mind.
Absolutely. Good point. Because he immediately went into these quite colorful impersonations. First one was his idea of how Lula's wife, Janja, might react. He did this whole voice basically saying, Janja, what's happening? I came to talk to these silly people and they booed me. When you talk, everyone applauds. Teach me. I've lost my touch. Something like that.
Slight chuckle. Okay, so leaning into the drama.
Very much so. And then he made the sarcastic comment about a leftist news anchor's reporting, making it sound like she was, almost personally devastated by the booing. He painted this picture of loyal supporters just being deeply hurt by it all. What's interesting there, I think, is how satire, even if it's really biased, can sort of show you the feeling around an event.
Yeah, it acts like a kind of barometer, doesn't it? Dias's take, even though it's obviously not objective, probably connects with people who feel similarly. It tells you something about the emotional reaction, maybe more than a straight news report could.
Exactly. It really underlines how differently these things can be seen and reported, depending on who's talking and who they're talking to.
Different frames for different audiences.
Right. Then Ricardo brought back his Janja voice. This time it was her supposed explanation for the booing aimed at the mayors.
Okay, what was the take this time?
Well, it was pretty blunt. Something like, it's a bunch of fascist mayors, all Bolsonaristas, of course they'd boo.
Okay, so directly political.
Very. And he followed that up with a really cynical perspective on the whole Marcha dos Prefeitos itself. Basically hinting it's more about, political games and getting access to public money than actual policy.
That's a common cynical view of these large political gatherings, isn't it? That there are other motives at play.
Definitely. And then he went off on a bit of a tangent, some pretty colorful speculation about local businesses getting ready for all the mayors arriving. Let's just say it involved certain adult establishments.
Right. So using quite crude humor there, likely hyperbole, to express that skepticism about the whole affair.
Exactly. It's that kind of satire, maybe not for everyone, but it's a way commentators express distrust, I suppose.
It is. It's a tool, however blunt.
So then came the second round of booing, and Ricardo seemed immediately drawn to the news anchor's face on screen. Sound clip of intense booing again.
The second time it happened.
Yeah. And Dias is saying something like, look at her face, she even pouted. They booed my pappy. Why? I'll ask Josias. Josias, why did they boo our pappy, Josias?
Okay, so focusing on the perceived emotional reaction of the media covering it.
Right. He seemed really amused by what he saw as her sort of investment in it. And then he turns to the commentator, Josias de Souza, basically asking why their pappy, meaning Lula, got booed.
Which does highlight the different media roles, doesn't it? The anchor reports, the commentator analyzes, and Dias, with satire, is kind of critiquing both the event and the coverage itself.
That's a good way to put it. The news anchor did mention, the political mix among the mayors, that many might not be aligned with Lula's government. Ricardo's sarcastic reaction to that.
Let me guess. More skepticism.
Pretty much. He goes, but there are so many mayors, how can they not be supporters? It's the government, the one with the money. Isn't the big coat, meaning political maneuvering, winning them over? Oh, wait, most leftist mayors lost the last election. Right, it's the people getting tired of this cancer, the left.
Okay, so he's injecting his own very clear political stance there, framing the booing as public rejection of the left. It's really crucial, like you said, to separate his opinions from the anchor's reporting.
Absolutely vital. The anchor did stress the importance of it happening twice, though, 2 separate booing incidents. And that's when Josias de Souza mentioned Lula's courage for showing up at all, given what happened last year.
Right, acknowledging the history.
De Souza said, it's noteworthy. Also noteworthy is Lula's courage, right? Because he had already been booed last year.
Okay, framing it as resilience.
But Ricardo's response was just dripping with sarcasm.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, he goes, of course, super courageous man. That's the takeaway. You need courage. Only a courageous man goes on stage after being booed last year. Then he does this mock Lula voice. And Lula, an illiterate man, nothing to eat? Waited for lizards to eat each other to get fat so he could eat them? A man like that isn't scared of booing. I'll face anything.
Wow. Okay, so heavily mocking the idea that simply attending is some great act of bravery,
yeah,
especially compared to Lula's own stories of actual hardship.
Exactly. And he even suggested Lula probably had his own supporters, his cupinchas, planted near the front to try and generate some applause.
Ah, the idea of manufactured support. That's a classic cynical take in politics, isn't it? The suspicion that it's not always spontaneous.
Very common. It taps into that general skepticism about, how real these public displays are.
It does. So Josias de Souza, the commentator, what was his actual analysis beyond the courage point?
Well, he explained that this event, the Marcha, brings together local leaders from all across the political map. And crucially, he pointed out that candidates from the Centrão, this big influential bloc in Brazilian politics, they largely won the last round of municipal elections.
Ah, the Centrão.
Yeah.
Right. That's a really key piece of context.
Ricardo picked up on that immediately, naturally. He said something like, he doesn't say they're from the right, does he? No, it's the Centrão. Everything elected was Centrão.
Mm-hmm.
And then he linked it directly to Lula's position. That shows how weakened Lula is, and without money. Because if he was handing out cash, the Centrão would be with him. They go where the money is. But since he broke the country, no one supports him.
Okay, so Dias interprets the Centrão presence and the booing as a sign of Lula's weakness and lack of transactional power. De Souza's point about the Centrão's electoral success is very significant, though. The Centrão is often pragmatic, focused on local issues. Their alliances can shift. So if they're not enthusiastically backing Lula, which the booing might suggest, that does point to potential trouble for his administration in Congress. They need that support.
Yeah, it signals a real challenge for building a stable coalition. Dias's interpretation, cynical as it is, kind of aligns with that transactional view of the Centrão.
It does seem to reflect that perspective.
And Ricardo, well, he then launched into another memorable, if perhaps slightly offensive, impersonation. This time, Lula trying to woo the Centrão.
Oh, what was the analogy this time?
He used this exaggeratedly seductive tone, like, come, just a little, puff, just a dose, come and try it, you'll like it. Come with me, Centrão, come.
Right. So, again, using satire and kind of suggestive language to paint Lula's efforts to get their support as maybe desperate or compromising, at least from Dias's viewpoint.
That seems to be the angle, yeah. Josias de Souza then made the point that even having Centrão parties in the government doesn't guarantee their votes in Congress.
That's a crucial distinction. Having ministers doesn't always equal reliable legislative backing.
Right. Ricardo's reaction. Predictably, more exasperation and mockery. Oh, what a crybaby, he said. Just talking about a booing.
Dismissing the focus on it.
Yeah. And then he conjured this image. I imagine Lula in samba shorts, dress shoes, socks up to his cap, shirtless, dancing for the Centrão guy.
Okay, quite the visual. Dias is really hammering that theme of a potential disconnect between the executive and legislative support from the Centrão, suggesting those alliances might be pretty shaky.
Definitely seems to be this take. And then he made this broader observation that kind of stuck with me.
What was that?
He just said, he gets booed everywhere he goes.
Now, if that's actually true, if it's a recurring thing in various places, that could indicate a wider issue, couldn't it? A broader disconnect beyond just this specific group of mayors.
It could. He also circled back to the applause, suggesting the initial bit probably came from Lula's Pelagata, his loyalists or government supporters positioned right at the front.
Ah, the term Pelagata. That often implies a less organic support, maybe tied to patronage.
Yeah, it can carry that negative connotation. So the idea is that the mayors further back were less keen from the start. And then, of course, he had to get in another dig at Vice President Alckmin's appearance.
Oh, Alckmin got dragged into it, too.
Yep. Compared his head to a water tank in Frankenstein, basically. Said he looked like someone from The Simpsons.
Right. These personal attacks, well, maybe humorous to Dias's audience, they do kind of pull away from the actual political substance, don't they?
They definitely do. And he finished his whole segment with a sort of mock plea for help back in his Janja voice.
How did that go?
Just sort of crying sounds, then, Janja, help me! Janja, help me!
Okay. So quite the performance throughout.
Absolutely. But amidst all that colorful commentary, Lula himself did actually deliver a message there.
Right. What was the core point he was trying to make to the mayors?
His main thrust was that the federal government needs to see mayors as partners, not opponents. Partners in actually getting federal policies implemented on the ground. And importantly, that the costs for these policies should be shared.
Ah, the funding issue.
Yeah.
It's always central for mayors.
Exactly.
So by talking partnership and shared costs, he's trying to address their key concerns directly, probably hoping to build some goodwill, get cooperation, regardless of their politics. It's a direct response, in a way, to any negativity like the booing.
Makes sense. So when we pull all this together, you've got the booing itself, the fairly straight news report, and then Ricardo Dias's very distinct satirical view. What does it all tell us, do you think, about Brazil's political climate right now?
Well, I think this seemingly small incident, the booing and especially the way it's being discussed, really opens a window onto some complex dynamics. The booing itself could be many things, right? Genuine policy opposition, maybe local frustrations bubbling up, or just reflecting the political makeup of that specific group. Lots of Central mayors, as de Souza noted.
Right, multiple possible reasons.
Exactly. And Dias's commentary, however biased and satirical it is, it probably resonates with a chunk of the public that's critical of Lula. It highlights those deep political divides we know exist.
And it shows how differently people experience and interpret the same event.
Precisely. It's striking how a few moments of essentially negative feedback can spark such varied interpretations and expose these underlying political tensions and sentiments.
It really is.
And it underlines the role of different media, different commentators in framing how we, the public, understand these moments. They don't just report, they shape perception.
That brings us towards the end of this particular deep dive, but maybe one last thing for you, the listener, to think about. What is the role of humor and satire in how we process politics? Does it, trivialize things? Or does it actually offer a different kind of insight, a way to critique power or gauge public feeling?
That's a great question. Does it cut through or just distract?
And how do these wildly different takes on the same event, the factual report versus the comedic attack, how might that reflect the bigger divisions in society? Something to mull over, definitely. How leaders deal with public sentiment and how narratives get shaped.